He produces one of the most renowned college football previews that has been one of the industry standards for decades. He is Phil Steele of Phil Steele's College Football Preview here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is the kind of content we produce and deliver each and every day. So if you love the game that we love, please lock it in here with a subscription. That way you turn on the bell for the notifications and know when we go live. Phil, how you doing today?
You know, I am doing great, Mark. How about yourself?
I am doing just fine. I know that as it is the case each and every year, you have just been able to make it through a whirlwind of information gathering and compilation of data to produce the publication that you do each and every year. And to a certain extent, I clumped you in with all the fine other publications, but yours is very unique when it comes to just the amount of data that you're able to squeeze into the number of those pages and just the formula that you've put together. So for anybody who, and I can't imagine, and we encourage anybody to go out there, maybe in this day of information that's online, some of the younger people that we have in our demographic is 21 to 35 in regards to who watches me most, maybe hasn't come across your publication. Give us a feel for what people will find there in the publication and what your formula is.
Well, it's like getting 130 different media guides rolled into one, except it's even better because all the information is in the same spot in every page, and we give you the same amount of coverage on a team like UL Monroe or Buffalo that we do on Oklahoma, Alabama, USC, all the top teams out there. 2 full pages, all laid out the same, 352 pages overall. You can get it online as well if you want to download it to your iPad or iPhone, things like that. But the magazine is a 6-month process. I mean, we start the Saturday after the Sunday after Thanksgiving. For the teams whose seasons are complete, we were able to get 4 full months into the magazine before they shut down Ohio, and then that's what delayed the magazine's release a little bit this year. I was toiling away in an empty office for about a month and a half. Once the staff was able to return, they came back full bore, and then I talked to 110 or more of the 130 head coaches out there this year, going over the team with them. Each one spent about an hour with me going over every player in the team, and it helps us get our 3-4 deeps in order. And I like to feel we've got about 4 times the amount of information in any other magazine out there.
So, of course, Phil, you had to endure, as you alluded to, some challenges that none of us could have forecasted at any point in regards to the information process this off season. So did you find it to be less taxing because of spring football being canceled and you didn't have to deal with trying to figure out what the impact and the ramifications of spring football would be on this season, or much more challenging because of the obvious, because of not having the staff and not having spring football to be another component of the data?
Yeah, I would put it in the more challenging role. In fact, back in March when I'm in this empty office by myself wondering, maybe we're going to put out a football magazine this year. But let's mention, once the staff came back and I started talking to the coaches, then I got fired up for the season, Mark, because, you know, the coaches, I'd be like, well, coach, sorry to hear you didn't get a spring practice. And they're like, you know what? We had the off-season conditioning. We had winter conditioning. We were all set and ready to go. And the only thing that's going to hurt is maybe a redshirt freshman's not going to be able to jump over a junior because of the lack of spring practices. But we'll be ready to go. Put the ball on the turf, and we're ready to play. Almost every single coach universally had that next man up attitude, and it got me a little fired up. I'm believing we're playing football this year.
Got Phil Steele on the line from Phil Steele's College Football Preview, ESPN Insider as well here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please lock it in right here. So you mentioned that in regards to conversations with head coaches. I'm sure many of them, I don't remember what the number would be. Mike Norvell tops the list, and there are a number of other ones out there, several in the Pac-12 that are obviously first-year head coaches. And that challenge in the first year is to develop players, build an infrastructure, maybe change the environment, the culture, terminology, offensive and defensive systems possibly being switched. There's always that challenge, but I got to think that that was amplified who knows how many times based on this situation for a first-year head coach. So how did those conversations go, and what did you learn from those first-year head coaches and the unique challenges that they face in this particular offseason?
Yeah, and I think those are the ones that will suffer the most from what happened because especially a first-year head coach that had 0 spring practices. I was talking to a couple of those, and they were like, "Phil, I haven't even seen the kid throw a football," and so it will put them behind. I think the two that probably are in the toughest situation. Mel Tucker at Michigan State stepping in. He came in so late because Mark D'Antonio stepped down after he had signed the freshman class. There's all those weeks of anxiety. Who's going to be the next head coach? When he finally did come in, spring practice is canceled. Didn't even have the benefit of recruiting his own freshman. And they're an inexperienced team. I think experienced teams will fare well this year. So if you have an experienced team with an experienced head coach, then you're going to do well. Inexperienced team with the first-year head coach, you're going to struggle. They only have 10 returning starters, 0 spring practices. I think it could be a rough year for Michigan State, which has been the 3 straight bowls. I think it's going to be tough for them to make a bowl this year. The other one would be maybe Mississippi State. Coach Mike Leach. I mean, talking about a complete shift of the offense. They had big run-blocking offensive linemen in a run game based on the quarterback running the football. Now they're completely switching into a pass offense. Mike Leach at Washington State always led the nation with the highest percentage of passes thrown in a game. And so a complete retooling of the offense with 0 spring practices for a new head coach playing in the SEC. I think it's going to be a tough year for Mike Leach at Mississippi State. But generally, I think as a rule of thumb, first-year head coach is probably going to struggle a little bit this year.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic you bring up with Michigan State in particular in regards to people becoming accustomed to Michigan State being a national contender and a Big Ten contender, when if you really look at the history of the program since the 70s, Mark D'Antonio did an amazing job there over the first half of his tenure to lift them to the standard that he did. That's a tough go at Michigan State in regards to recruiting challenges and playing in that division. And now with a first-year head coach, Michigan State could have some issues there. And then, yes, the Mike Leach turnaround in an offense, if anybody can pull it off, it would be him. But, yeah, that's certainly a transformation that's going to be difficult in one off season under the circumstances. Got Phil Steele on the line talking college football, of course. Order the magazine. We do each and every year Phil Steele's college football preview, also an ESPN insider. Phil, I've been doing a series in which I've been looking back on national championship conclusions and some of the more controversial ones, whether they were back in the poll era, the BCS era, or now in the college football playoff era, and the way the season could have concluded, how it could have been looked at. You know, you take 1983 in particular with Miami winning and jumping from 5-1 after the Orange Bowl win, but you look at Auburn playing the most difficult schedule and having the same record, and just basically reviewing the controversies throughout the years. And the thing that struck me that I lived through, so it shouldn't have been that much of a revelation, but it just brought back some memories of how diverse the landscape was in college football in the 1980s, where you had the likes of Illinois and Iowa competing for Big Ten championships on a regular basis, and on the fringe conversation of national championships, where during the playoff era, it's almost been locked into this Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma dynamic with a few others jumping in there. Do you see any wild card teams out there that have the potential of jumping into this scenario that seems to be so locked into 5 or 6 schools?
Yeah, I do this year. And one of them, my number one surprise team or a non-top 10 team that I don't think anybody's going to have in their top 10 this year, but I think can actually contend for the playoff spot is Texas A&M. And that goes back to my conversations with Coach Jimbo Fisher last year. 2 things really stood out to me about Texas A&M. Number one, they were a young team. They had very few seniors last year. And the second was, looking at his schedule, I'm like, whoa, Coach, you're going to play a heck of a schedule this year. And as it turns out, they took on number 1 ranked Clemson, number 1 ranked Alabama, and number 1 ranked LSU. 3 number 1 teams all in the same season, plus the number 4 Georgia and number 8 Auburn. So 5 top 10 teams with a young team. Now, practically the entire team is back. They got 17 returning starters. Coach Fisher's brought in 3 great recruiting classes. This is a deep team. They go 2 to 3 deep at every single position. It's a veteran team. They have an experienced head coach, and the schedule gets a lot softer. In fact, at the end of the conversation last year, I said, Coach, I'm going to put you on my national magazine cover next year. Well, next year's here, and it's a veteran A&M team with a much softer schedule. They may only play 1 top 10 team this year. I think the Aggies have a chance to surprise a lot of folks.
Phil, there's a couple teams out there that come to mind in that category for me in regards to boom or bust. Are they ready to explode this season? There's so many things going on in the positive vein from a recruiting standpoint, and I'm thinking Tennessee, but even more so, I'm thinking North Carolina. What's your take on those two?
I think both are in for good seasons. Tennessee's going to be a contender in the East. I think when you look at how they've gone, when I talked to Coach Pruitt the first year he was at Tennessee, you know, he was coming from Alabama and Georgia's previous two stops, and naturally Tennessee did not have that type of talent level. So he was not enamored with what he was inheriting after being at those other two programs. And his first year, they lost 6 games by 25 points or more. So there was a lot of blowout losses. They weren't even close to the big boys. Last year, they got closer, but there were still blowouts. Florida beat them 34-3, Georgia 43-14. But this year's team is much stronger. And as you touched on, Mark, how about 17 returning starters, a veteran quarterback in Garantano, the momentum of winning your last 6 games, which really helps the confidence level. And talking to Coach Bird this year, I said, you're playing Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Coach, do you feel you can compete with them? And he said there's not a team on our schedule that we don't feel we can beat. So they feel they can get there. This may be the year they jump into the SEC East race. They are clearly a much better team than the Tennessee team of 3 years ago. And with North Carolina, wow, what a job Mac Brown did last year. He took over my number 105 most experienced team, one coming off a pair of 3-win seasons, got them to 7 wins. It wasn't easy. Remember, they were 4-6 at one point last year, and then won 3 straight blowouts down the stretch to finish 7-6. Well, this year they've got Sam Howell back at quarterback, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams at running back, a deep core of offensive line. The defense led by Chaz Surratt's going to be solid. And how about overall they jump up to number 30 on my experience chart with 17 returning starters. I've got North Carolina as one of my surprise teams in the country this year, my number 3 most surprise team in the country. And remember, if they do get to the ACC title game last year, they were a missed 2-point conversion away from beating Clemson. So they'll go into that game with confidence.
And considering the division set up, and we don't know what the ACC is going to decide, but certainly interesting situation where North Carolina would be the favorite along with Miami in the Coastal Division. And really, with all the talk of some of the big non-conference games that were originally scheduled, Ohio State, Oregon in particular, LSU, Texas, the 2 that I was looking forward to seeing was North Carolina, UCF, and North Carolina, Auburn, just to see how the Tar Heels were looking early in the season to see if they were possibly ready to make that leap. We got Phil Steele on the line. Phil Steele's college football preview. Also, you can catch him as an ESPN insider, and he's been an industry standard for decades in compiling all of this. And it's just a deep dive into college football to get you prepped for the 2020 season. Phil, speaking of those games that I mentioned, some already taken off the books for sure. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 have made their decisions to not play non-conference games. We're still waiting to hear from the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC. Based on your vast experience, but this is uncharted territory, do you have a feel for what decisions are going to be made and what these schedules are going to look like once they're decided?
I do not have a definitive feel. I mean, I'm hoping, Mark, that we play full schedules for the ACC, SEC. That would be great if they did, even with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten deciding on conference only. But if it turns out to be conference only, then I'm thrilled that we're playing college football, just to be honest with you. And, you know, the magazine is done based on conference forecasts. It's never about overall record. It's based on how I think the teams will finish in the conference. So as long as we're playing conference football, I'm happy. But I'd love to see some of those big non-conference matchups.
And Phil, before we let you go, your thoughts about the playoff, not in particular to this dynamic of a season, because some people are saying, hey, if they don't play non-conference games, how do you evaluate the conferences? We'd have to expand the playoff. Well, that flies in the face of the safety guidelines and what we're doing in actually limiting the schedule and limiting travel. But just overall, in the way the playoffs conducted each and every year with the committee making the selections, what is your thought about the way it's currently constructed and what it should be?
Well, I tell you, Mark, I'm a little prejudiced when it comes to this because in the magazine, I believe it was about 15, 16 years ago, I wrote my first article, what I thought was the ideal playoff situation. And I said, it's a 14 playoff. Let's play 1 against 4 and 2 against 3. We'll have a national champ every year because you really can't go deeper than 4 for legitimate national title honors. And I don't want to get to the point where it turns into like the FCS, where you're playing 5 extra games and then it becomes just a battle of attrition. Who stays the healthiest through playing 5 playoff games in a 5-week span? So I always thought I said for 10 years I wrote about the magazine, 14 playoff. It finally happened. So I'm pretty thrilled we have a 14 playoff, and I think we've had a legitimate national champion each and every year. And I really don't feel we've left anybody out of the mix as well. So I'm still a 4-man playoff or 14 playoff guy.
Phil Steele, it's not too late to pick up his college football preview edition. It's a staple in the industry, no doubt, and has been for decades. Phil, we appreciate you giving us your time. We know it's been a whirlwind off season as it typically is, but it threw you a whole lot of different challenges this time around. So thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, real pleasure, Mark. And one thing I want to point out real quick is that if you normally go and get the magazine anywhere, we printed a limited quantity this year. So the only places it's available, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Don't bother looking anyplace else. It's not out there. Very limited quantity this year. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million only.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time and again for that update. Phil, have a great day.
Hey, thanks, Mark. A lot of fun talking football with you today, my friend.